Mary Magdalene stands as one of the most compelling and misunderstood figures in the New Testament. Her story is not just another account buried in ancient texts. It's a powerful narrative of transformation, redemption, and unwavering devotion. In a time when women were rarely highlighted, her presence breaks through history with undeniable significance. She is remembered not for where she started, but for who she became after encountering Jesus. And that alone makes her story impossible to ignore. What makes Mary Magdalene so remarkable is not the amount of information we have about her, but the weight of the moments she was part of. She appears at critical turning points in the life of Jesus, during his ministry, at the crucifixion, at the burial, and most importantly, at the resurrection. These are not random appearances. They reveal a woman deeply committed, consistently present when others walked away. And in a story where loyalty matters, her role speaks volumes. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Mary Magdalene becomes the first person to witness the risen Christ. Think about that for a second. In a culture where a woman's testimony was often dismissed, she is chosen to carry the most important message in Christian history. That moment alone reshapes how we understand her place in the Bible. She is not just a follower, she is a messenger of the resurrection. Her story also challenges many assumptions people have carried for centuries. Over time, myths and misconceptions have blurred her identity, overshadowing the truth found in the Gospels. But when we return to the biblical text, what we find is not scandal, but strength. Not shame, but restoration. Mary Magdalene represents what happens when a life completely transformed by Jesus becomes a life fully devoted to him. And maybe that's where her story begins to connect with us today. Because at its core, her journey reflects something deeply human: the desire to be changed, to be seen, and to find purpose beyond our past. As we move forward, we'll uncover what the Bible actually reveals about her life, and what it never says at all. And trust me, the difference changes everything. When we begin to examine the life of Mary Magdalene through the lens of Scripture, one thing becomes immediately clear. The Bible is surprisingly selective in what it tells us about her. There are no detailed accounts of her childhood, no mention of her family, and no background story explaining how she grew up. In a modern world obsessed with full biographies, this absence can feel unusual. But in the context of the Gospels, it's intentional. What matters most is not her past, but her encounter with Jesus. The name Magdalene itself offers one of the few clues about her identity. It likely connects her to Magdala, a small fishing village on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee. This detail may seem simple, but it places her in a very real historical and geographical setting. Magdala was known as a bustling town, possibly marked by trade and cultural diversity. And from this ordinary place comes a woman whose story would become extraordinary. Still, the silence around her personal life has opened the door to centuries of speculation. People have tried to fill in the gaps with assumptions, theories, and even fictional narratives. But here's the key point. What the Bible does not say is just as important as what it does say. There is no mention of her being married, no reference to children, and no direct connection to any specific social status beyond her association with Jesus. This lack of detail forces us to shift our focus. Instead of getting lost in curiosity about her background, we are invited to pay attention to her transformation and her actions. The Gospels introduce her not through her past, but through a defining moment, her liberation, and her decision to follow Christ. It's almost as if her previous identity fades into the background the moment she encounters him. And maybe that's the point. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are not about where someone came from, but about what changed everything. As we move into the next part of her journey, we begin to uncover the reality of her condition before meeting Jesus. A reality far more intense than most people imagine. Before her life became a testimony of transformation, Mary Magdalene was living in a reality that most people today can hardly imagine. The Gospel of Luke gives us a brief but striking detail. She had been delivered from 7 demons. That single statement opens a window into a life marked by deep spiritual oppression. This wasn't just emotional struggle or a difficult season. It was something far more intense, affecting her mind, her behavior, and likely how society perceived her. In the cultural and spiritual context of the time, demonic possession was often associated with suffering, isolation, and loss of control. People in that condition were frequently pushed to the margins, misunderstood, and even feared. So when we read that Mary Magdalene had 7 demons, it suggests a level of torment that was severe and overwhelming. The number itself may even symbolize completeness, indicating that her oppression was total. Imagine what that kind of life would feel like. No stability, no peace, no sense of identity, just chaos, confusion, and constant internal struggle. It's possible that people avoided her, labeled her, or dismissed her as beyond help. And in many ways, that's what makes her story so powerful. Because she represents someone who had every reason to be forgotten, yet wasn't. Then comes the turning point. Not through her own strength, not through human intervention, but through an encounter with Jesus. There's no detailed description of the moment, no dramatic dialogue recorded. But the outcome speaks louder than any words ever could. She was completely set free, not partially restored, but entirely transformed. And this is where her story begins to shift from darkness to purpose. Because when someone who has experienced that level of freedom finds the source of it, they don't walk away unchanged. They follow. They stay. They commit. And that's exactly what Mary Magdalene does next. As we step into the moment where everything about her life takes a new direction, the moment Mary Magdalene encountered Jesus, everything changed, completely and irreversibly. What once defined her life, oppression, confusion, and suffering, was suddenly replaced with clarity, peace, and purpose. This wasn't a gradual improvement or a slow recovery. It was a radical transformation, the kind that only happens when something supernatural interrupts the natural course of a person's life. Jesus didn't just address her condition, he restored her identity. In a world where she may have been seen as broken or beyond repair, he saw something entirely different. He didn't reject her. He didn't avoid her. Instead, he stepped into her reality and brought freedom where there had only been bondage. And that kind of encounter leaves a mark that can't be erased. From that point forward, Mary Magdalene makes a decision that defines the rest of her story. She chooses to follow him, not out of obligation, but out of gratitude, not because she had to, but because she understood what had been done for her. When someone experiences that level of liberation, loyalty becomes a natural response, and her life becomes a reflection of that devotion. Her transformation also reveals something deeper about the nature of change itself. It shows that true transformation doesn't just alter behavior, it reshapes purpose. She wasn't just freed from something, she was called into something, a new path, a new identity, a new mission. And that shift is what turns her from a former victim into a faithful disciple. And as her journey continues, we begin to see that her commitment wasn't passive. She didn't just follow from a distance. She became actively involved in supporting Jesus and his ministry. Because when a life is truly transformed, it doesn't stay on the sidelines, it steps into action. And that's exactly where her story leads next. As Mary Magdalene's life took on new meaning, her role in the ministry of Jesus became increasingly active and intentional. She wasn't just someone who followed from a distance. She was part of a group of women who traveled with him and the disciples throughout Galilee. This detail, recorded in the Gospel of Luke, reveals something powerful. She was present, involved, and committed to the mission in a very practical way. In fact, the scriptures tell us that Mary Magdalene, along with other women, supported Jesus' ministry out of their own resources. That means she didn't just give her time, she gave what she had. Her transformation translated into generosity, and this kind of support played a crucial role in sustaining the ministry as it moved from town to town. Behind the scenes, her contribution helped make the visible mission possible. This challenges a common misconception about what it means to follow a purpose. Not everyone stands in the spotlight, but every role matters. Mary Magdalene's service reminds us that impact isn't always about visibility. Sometimes it's about faithfulness in what we can offer, and she offered what she had, consistently and willingly. It's also important to recognize how countercultural this was. In that time, women were rarely acknowledged as contributors in religious movements. Yet here she is, named, recognized, and remembered. That alone speaks volumes about both her importance and the way Jesus elevated those who were often overlooked by society. And as her involvement deepens, we begin to see something even more profound. Her commitment wasn't conditional. She didn't just stay when things were easy. She remained when things became difficult. Because the next moments in the story would test the loyalty of everyone who followed Jesus. And not all would remain, but Mary Magdalene would. As the story of Jesus moves toward its most painful moment, the atmosphere shifts dramatically. What was once a growing movement filled with hope now becomes a scene of fear, tension, and uncertainty. Many who had followed him closely began to disappear, overwhelmed by the weight of what was happening. But in the middle of that chaos, one detail stands out with quiet strength. Mary Magdalene was still there. The Gospels make it clear that she was among the women who stood near the cross. While others kept their distance or fled entirely, she remained present in one of the most devastating moments in history. This wasn't a place of comfort or safety. It was a place of suffering, grief, and public humiliation. And yet, she chose to stay. The Gospel of John paints an even more vivid picture, describing her as standing close to the cross, not watching from afar, not hiding in the background, but present, fully aware, fully engaged, and fully committed. That kind of loyalty is rare, especially when there is nothing to gain and everything to lose. Imagine witnessing someone you deeply respect being crucified in front of you. The emotional weight of that moment is almost impossible to measure, and still she doesn't turn away. Her presence speaks louder than words ever could. It shows that her faith wasn't built on convenience, it was rooted in something far deeper. And this is where her story becomes even more powerful, because true devotion is revealed not in moments of victory, but in moments of pain. Mary Magdalene didn't just follow Jesus in his miracles, she stood with him in his suffering. And as the events continue to unfold, her faithfulness will lead her to yet another defining moment, one that takes place in silence, at a tomb. After the crucifixion, a heavy silence settles over everything. The crowds begin to disperse, the noise fades, and what remains is grief, raw, quiet, and overwhelming. For many, this moment marked the end of hope. But for Mary Magdalene, the story wasn't over. Even in the stillness of loss, she stayed close, refusing to disconnect from what had just happened. The Gospels tell us that she witnessed where Jesus was laid. This detail might seem small at first, but it carries deep significance. She wasn't just present at the cross, she followed through to the burial. She paid attention, she observed. She made sure she knew exactly where his body was placed. That level of care reveals something profound about her devotion. Joseph of Arimathea prepared the tomb, placing Jesus' body inside, while Mary Magdalene and another Mary watched closely. They didn't interrupt. They didn't speak. They simply remained there, absorbing the weight of the moment. It's a scene filled with quiet loyalty, a kind of faith that doesn't need to be loud to be strong. Imagine sitting there facing what seems like a final goodbye. No clear answers, no visible future, just a sealed tomb and unanswered questions. And yet, even in that uncertainty, she doesn't walk away. Because real commitment doesn't disappear when things don't make sense. It holds on, even in silence. And that silence sets the stage for something no one expected. Because while the tomb appeared to be the end, it was actually the beginning of something greater. And the next chapter of this story will unfold at dawn, when Mary Magdalene returns to that very place, only to find that everything has changed. Before the sun rises, while the world is still wrapped in silence, Mary Magdalene makes her way back to the tomb. There's no celebration, no expectation of a miracle, only a deep sense of devotion. She comes not as someone looking for answers, but as someone honoring what she believes is the end. In that quiet early moment, her actions speak of love, loyalty, and unfinished grief. But when she arrives, something is different. The stone has been rolled away. The tomb, once sealed, is now open, and instantly, everything shifts. Confusion replaces certainty. Questions flood her mind. This is not what she expected to find. The place that held finality now presents a mystery that demands attention. As the Gospels describe, she encounters angels inside the tomb, messengers who speak into her confusion. They don't offer long explanations. Instead, they point to a simple but life-altering truth. He is not here. The weight of those words begins to reshape everything she thought she understood. But even then, the full reality hasn't settled in yet. Then comes the moment that changes history forever. She turns and sees Jesus. At first, she doesn't recognize him. It's only when he calls her name that everything becomes clear. That single word breaks through her sorrow and awakens recognition. The one she thought was gone is standing right in front of her, alive. And in that moment, Mary Magdalene becomes the first witness of the resurrection, the first to see him, the first to hear his voice after death had been defeated. And then, she is given a mission. Go and tell the others, from silence to proclamation, from grief to purpose. And her story now moves from witnessing to announcing the greatest message the world has ever known. Over the centuries, Mary Magdalene's story has been surrounded by layers of interpretation, some based on scripture and many others shaped by tradition, confusion, and speculation. One of the most widespread beliefs is that she was a prostitute. It's a narrative that has been repeated so often that many accept it as fact. But here's the truth. There is no biblical evidence to support that claim. This misconception largely comes from a historical mix-up. In some early interpretations, Mary Magdalene was incorrectly associated with another woman mentioned in the Gospels, the unnamed, sinful woman who anoints Jesus with perfume. Over time, these separate figures were merged into one identity. But when we carefully read the biblical text, we see that they are not the same person. The Bible introduces Mary Magdalene in a very specific way, as a woman who had been delivered from 7 demons. That's her defining background in Scripture, not prostitution, not adultery, not scandal, just a powerful story of spiritual liberation. Everything else that has been added over time comes from outside the biblical account. There's also no indication that she was the woman caught in adultery or any other unnamed female figure in the Gospels. These assumptions may have made for dramatic storytelling, but they don't hold up under careful study. And when we remove these layers of misunderstanding, what remains is a much clearer and more powerful portrait of who she truly was. Because when the myths fall away, her real story becomes even stronger. Not a figure defined by shame, but by transformation. Not someone remembered for a past of sin, but for her unwavering presence in the most important moments of Jesus' life. And as we move forward, we'll see how other theories, far more elaborate, have tried to reshape her story even further. As time passed, Mary Magdalene's story didn't just remain within the pages of the Bible, it expanded into a world of legends, alternative writings, and controversial theories. Some of these ideas come from apocryphal texts, often referred to as Gnostic Gospels, which were written long after the original accounts of the New Testament. These writings attempt to present a different perspective, sometimes portraying her in roles far beyond what Scripture describes. One of the most popular and debated claims is that Mary Magdalene had a romantic relationship with Jesus. This idea has been fueled by books, movies, and modern interpretations that blur the line between history and fiction. But when we examine credible historical sources and the canonical Gospels, there is no evidence to support such a relationship. These theories may capture attention, but they lack solid foundation. It's important to understand why these alternative narratives exist. Many of them were written in contexts where symbolic language, mysticism, and philosophical ideas were blended together. They weren't intended to serve as historical records in the same way the Gospels were. Instead, they often reflect theological agendas or cultural influences from their time. This creates a clear distinction between the biblical account and later interpretations. The Gospels present Mary Magdalene as a devoted follower, a witness, and a messenger. The apocryphal texts, on the other hand, sometimes elevate her into symbolic or exaggerated roles that go beyond the original narrative. And while these ideas may be intriguing, they require careful discernment. Because at the end of the day, the question isn't what sounds interesting, it's what is true. And when we return to the biblical foundation, we find a story that doesn't need embellishment to be powerful. In fact, the simplicity of who she really was makes her impact even greater. And that leads us to the final question. What do we actually know about Mary Magdalene with certainty? When we strip away the myths, the assumptions, and the centuries of speculation, what remains is a clear and powerful picture of Mary Magdalene. The Bible presents her as a woman who was profoundly transformed by an encounter with Jesus. She was delivered from spiritual oppression, and that moment became the turning point of her entire life. From that day forward, everything about her story is marked by devotion, loyalty, and purpose. She wasn't a distant observer. She was an active participant in the ministry of Jesus. She traveled with him, supported his mission with her own resources, and stood alongside other women who played a crucial role behind the scenes. This reveals something essential about her character. She didn't just believe, she invested. Her faith wasn't passive, it was expressed through action. Her presence during the most critical moments of Jesus' life is undeniable. She was there at the crucifixion when many had fled. She witnessed his burial when hope seemed lost. And she returned to the tomb when others stayed away. These are not minor details. They are defining moments that highlight her unwavering commitment. And then comes the most extraordinary part. She becomes the first witness of the resurrection, the first to see Jesus alive, the first to hear his voice after death had been defeated, and the first to be sent with the message that would change the course of history. That alone secures her place as one of the most significant figures in the gospel narrative. So when we ask, who was Mary Magdalene really? The answer is both simple and profound. She was a woman set free, who chose to follow, who remained faithful when it mattered most, and who carried the message of hope when the world needed it most. And as we move into the final part of this journey, the question shifts from her story to ours. Mary Magdalene's story is more than a historical account. It's an invitation to see transformation in its purest form. When we look at her journey, we don't just see a woman from the past. We see a reflection of what is possible when a life encounters something greater than itself. She wasn't chosen because she was perfect. She was chosen because she was willing to respond. Throughout history, her identity has often been misunderstood, reshaped, and even distorted. But when we return to the biblical narrative, something remarkable happens. We rediscover the truth. A truth that doesn't rely on speculation or tradition, but on moments recorded with purpose. And those moments reveal a woman who stayed when others left, who believed when others doubted, and who carried hope when everything seemed lost. And maybe that's where her story becomes personal. Because at some level, everyone is searching for change, for meaning, for a fresh start. Her life reminds us that the past doesn't have to define the future, that restoration is possible, that purpose can emerge from the most unexpected places, and that a single encounter can rewrite everything. So here's a question worth thinking about. If you had been there that morning, standing in front of an empty tomb, would you have recognized what was happening? Or would you have walked away, missing the moment entirely? Because sometimes, the most life-changing realities appear in the quietest ways. If this story made you see things differently, take a moment to reflect. And don't stop here. There's so much more to explore about the life of Jesus, the meaning of the cross, and the power of the resurrection. Stay curious. Keep seeking. And if you're on this journey, you're already closer than you think. Mary Magdalene's story reminds us that no past is too broken, no life too far gone, and no situation beyond redemption. From darkness to purpose, from silence to proclamation, her journey stands as living proof that transformation is real. She didn't just witness history, she became part of it. And maybe that's the question her story leaves behind. What happens when you encounter truth and choose to respond? Because just like her, every life reaches a moment where a decision must be made. to walk away, or to follow. If this story challenged you, inspired you, or made you see things differently, don't stop here. There are deeper truths waiting to be discovered, and every story in the Bible connects to something greater. So here's what you can do next. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful biblical documentaries like this video to help this message reach more people, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. And before you go, take a moment and answer this in the comments. What part of Mary Magdalene's story impacted you the most? Because sometimes, the story you're watching is the story that's trying to change you.